There it goes. It says live. I believe we're live.
Hey, everybody. We are live. I'm here with Simon Esler. This is 𝗠𝘂 Eisenhower. I'm really excited about this broadcast because it has everything to do with keeping our sense of humor alive in these crazy times. And yeah, winning like wars through humor. It's such a bonding thing. And we're going to also talk about a show that you're going to be putting out, a comedy show. But first, I want to thank you so much for being here with me today, Simon. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you on. Well, I mean, this is just a topic that just hits so close to home. I was always kind of considered the class clown kind of person. Grew up on Monty Python. When I lived in England, we just do improv and we just lived to laugh. And that was actually what made us so close, me and the English schoolgirls. So tell us a bit about your journey and just what comedy and just humor has done for you throughout your life and where you are with it in these kind of times that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually formally trained in theater. So I have a degree in theater studies. So, you know, I spent a lot of my life performing on stage and doing comedy theater. So before the lockdowns and all this hit, I was actually regularly doing comedy theater on stage, like for a theater company. I was doing murder mystery dinner theater for, I think, 13 or 14 years. And so a huge part of my life was making comedic characters. I would build one character and then I would play that character for like 6 months, sometimes a whole year. So I got really into like character work. So this became a big part of my whole life and my psyche. And I would notice sometimes when, you know, every once in a while I would not be in a show for this company. I mean, I took a break like once or twice. And I would notice like my mental health would actually like go down when I wasn't expressing myself comedically, creatively on that level. I noticed it. And so this became especially relevant when the lockdowns hit because it shut down the whole theater industry. And so all that work I'd been doing for years just went like poof. And, you know, the company that I'd been working for this whole time, like the lockdowns totally destroyed them. And so I just didn't have an outlet. I didn't have an outlet anymore. And so, you know, I was doing some of my other work, like researching, you know, the war on the family and, you know, looking into like conspiracies around food and doing a lot of this more serious research. And it really started to become clear to me that I needed comedy as medicine for myself and just as a point of service, that there's a part of me that wants to serve humanity in this way. And so that was what sort of like drove me in that direction. And I ended up seeing, you know, a comedy special on Netflix. It was Bo Burnham's latest one. And I just found it really inspiring because for him, it was him literally dealing with the trauma of the lockdowns through a comedy special. So I was like, hey, you know what? I got to turn this into my medicine. I want to make a 60-minute comedy special, let it heal me and let it produce what it produces and just make fun of the Great Awakening and the New World Order and like how insane all of this really is because it's super weird. And that's sort of birthed my new comedy special, Theorize About Conspiracies.
And I see your shirt. That's so awesome. And this is huge because they really want to drop us in fear.
Check it out.
Yes. You know, the whole trying to drop us in fear and the divide and conquer, this is the perfect medicine to retaliate against this kind of indoctrination and conditioning, social engineering. I just saw a recent, I think it was Jim Brewer venting about the lockdowns and the jabs it was so hilarious. And I remember, I think he was on Saturday Night Live. But I was just glad because like some comedians like George Carlin, you know, there's truth that's woven into this humor that while you're laughing, you're actually, for maybe people that aren't used to these subjects, are getting somewhat red-pilled or they're able to look at themselves and maybe learn to laugh at themselves. And in our culture, in the times that we're in, there's so much offense and political correctness. What are your thoughts about this kind of social engineering that you're seeing where people are just offended over everything, or they're looking for flaws and they're looking to judge, and it's just like, lighten up. This is just so perfect. You're doing this. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Well, that kind of like cultural Marxism, it destroys from the individual level, it destroys authenticity because we can't be ourselves because the current script let's say when you look at like the gender politics that are being inserted to like every single narrative all the time. So the current script there is that you have to like constantly ask someone what their gender is, and you have to like in your mind like correct yourself so that you don't offend someone. And so the process of having to self-censor inside of yourself as you're trying to communicate, it destroys authenticity, and so it destroys real human connection. So literally the whole culture of being offended all the time and using it to virtue signal and to shame, this destroys the fabric of society, because it makes relationships impossible to maintain, especially in the public arena. And everyone becomes divided through the tactics that they've implemented according to sort of each different topic. So whether it's race or whether it's gender, any of these sort of big topics they keep inserting into all the conversations, even when it's totally inappropriate, makes it so that people who buy into this, they can't be themselves. And that's such a dangerous, dangerous thing. And children who grow up with self-censorship, they become severely damaged in their self-development, because again, they're constantly in their heads talking to themselves about not offending people, and then they can't be who they really are.
Ugh, so well put. Yeah. And it's so sad and troubling to see what's happening to this next generation. And it's so important that parents intervene as much as they can. I mean, I know what helped me raise my kids, and it was really tough being a single parent of twins, was humor. I would, as long as I put on a comedy act for them and I got them to laugh, everything was okay. And then,
yeah.
And it really helped them to, not feel sort of the strictness or control. And I know you're a parent. Do you bring a lot of humor into raising your son? Or you have more than one?
So I have two. Yeah, I have a 3-year-old named Idris and a 6-year-old named Asher. And at this point, they're walking around the house singing the songs from my comedy special, which is pretty awesome, considering that, for example, one of the songs is "Everything is Racist." So, they're walking around the house singing "Everything is Racist" because, they're getting to the point where they understand, like, I'm using culture to criticize these things. And so, they're constantly making like hilarious jokes about vaccinating people, like, I'm going to get you with the vaccine, and like, running around the house, because when we bring comedy into it and when they see their dad reflecting a very sort of dystopian era through comedy, they feel light about it. They don't feel afraid. They don't feel, like, obviously they are affected by it and they notice when things are stripped away during lockdowns and things like that, but they also know how to laugh at it, and they see the ridiculousness, and they see that the emperor has no clothes, and they're young, and it's good. It's very good.
Gosh, I remember just bringing in humor even when my stepdad was on his deathbed, and my half sister, she was being, of course, impacted, and somehow that would always break through to shed light on a situation that's always been there. And when I did my wilderness courses, and I don't sometimes know where it comes from, and sometimes I don't even really mean to make people laugh, but in the most stressful situations, I loved seeing that. Oh my gosh, that's my default is to make people laugh somehow, even if I don't even know what I'm doing that's so freaking funny. I got so much that is flawed about me that I can laugh at about myself. So maybe that is part of it. But I mean, that's got to be your default, because I mean, this is your mastery and skill, that in stressful situations, you pulled this out of left field, and your humor is so genius and brilliant. You sent me some clips, and I remember after I did the last interview, you sent me a clip, and man, truth bombs. And you guys, you're going to want to check it out. If we need levity more than ever is in this time that we're in, but do you find yourself in stressful situations, like just being able to fall back on that? I mean,
yeah, I mean, that was certainly my role in the family. I grew up as a middle child.
Me too.
And sort of, I was always in that place. Yeah, I get it. So like being the middle child, like goofing off to sort of when the family gets stressed out or overly serious, and just finding humor to cut through those moments. It can be a very healthy skill to bring to people. And like I said, like I really didn't realize how medicinal this was for me until I went and made this comedy special. It took me 3 months to write and shoot and edit this whole thing. And so the entire process, I made it about that because, you know, the lockdowns had made me sort of hate where I was. They made me hate Toronto. I felt angry at my hometown because I was just like, I was disgusted by the level of participation and how much they stripped away from the kids. You know, how they shut down playgrounds and they weren't letting kids on climbers and they're like taping up the playgrounds and stopping the kids. And I just got really angry. But what I realized was that I needed to use this comedy special as a means of not only finding humor, but reconnecting to where I am in the world and finding love for where I live and finding love for Toronto. So the special is actually in between sketches. I'm going to different places in Toronto and talking about some of the conspiracies and some of the darker things that are going on that are connected to those places in Toronto. And so for me, it was medicine too, in terms of reconnecting with my city and then finding humor in the darkness. You know, like I talk about this document, the Toronto Protocols, a lot. Just like it's a favorite of mine because it's a resource that was passed on to a journalist, Sergei Monast. And it's basically the notes or the script from a meeting between a bunch of New World Order sort of heads from around the world. And they met downtown Toronto in the 60s and in the 80s to literally map out what's going on right now. I mean, the second meeting they had was called the Red Wave in reference to the wave of communism they were planning on bringing to the West. And so now we're living in this. So, you know, I was fascinated by this idea of going to these places, of going downtown Toronto and just reminiscing about the fact that these New World Order people, this is where they came and met. And now, you know, we're living in the realization of their plans to a certain extent. So I'm going to go downtown and I'm going to laugh at them and I'm going to laugh at what's going on and I'm going to live free. And all of it was very transformative for me.
Right. And I mean, you're one of the few that is literally using humor to transmute a lot of this. So, I mean, that's beyond like a default. That's, you know, to me, like self-mastery and a very, very high spiritual quality. I mean, humor, I know yogis and just the spiritual, maybe guru type, not the fake kind of guru type, really, really emphasized the importance of humor as a means to be on a really powerful spiritual path. And even certain exercises with just the very act of laughter. I mean, that's going to shoot a person's frequency way up. There's no room for fear, guilt, shame, blame, victimhood. When we're laughing our asses off. I remember in school, like having to literally, like I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard because I'd cry when I laughed too. My friends and I, because we would just make fun of the teacher or whatever they were saying, we'd sit in the back of the classroom. Literally, we'd have to walk out. We'd just throw our bags down and we were just like rolling. Like we lived to laugh. That's all that mattered. So as like a high quality on a spiritual path, what are your thoughts about that? Because when I heard that, yes.
You know, that was another thing that was healing for me is I had spent so much time creating content that was like really deep into spiritual rabbit holes and like consciousness and all this. And, you know, I still am very fascinated by that. I still plan to make content sort of in that realm. But what I realized was that there's a lot of spiritual talk and there isn't an equivalent amount of like grounding that practically in the way we live, the way we do, the way we choose to be and apply ourselves from moment to moment. And so another sort of angle of this for me was this idea of all this help being offered to humanity that we're not taking. So like not taking the Earth's help, like really just not realizing the Earth is trying to help us this whole time. Or like, you know, people, for those of you that haven't seen it, I put out a trailer with a tree because one of the jokes in the special is that I got trees to be a sponsor for this comedy special. Because, you know, I was reading this book by Lujan Matus. He has this great new book called The Power of Emptiness. And in it, he like has these beautiful depictions of the empathic communion between humans and trees. And it's like, it's so masterfully written and it like depicts what really goes on and how like trees can help human beings evolve spiritually. And I just like, I got this idea that like, I wonder if the trees are annoyed that we're just not using their help at all. Like barely any of us, you know, they're just there in actual multidimensional stillness, like kind of waiting. Hello. So I just like being critical this way and thinking of like the higher realms kind of looking down on us and being like, guys, come on. I appreciate that, because I know that I have tons of spiritual knowledge that I don't apply. I have way more knowledge than what I apply. So for me, it's just a way of laughing at myself as well.
Oh man, that's brilliant. And I can relate to that. I definitely, I slack on things that I know that I have, that have been developed previously, that I kind of don't utilize like I should maybe. But bringing it back to humor, makes it all fun. Because if it's not fun, it's not very inspiring or motivating. It's kind of like, I don't like being on a treadmill. I'd rather go hiking. There's something, just the healing journey even. I mean, there has to be humor in that. And yes. The medicine of being able to bring humor into it, or making fun of the journey, or bringing humor into the journey. Gosh, we get to be real and authentic. And like you were saying about kids. And I love that little clip that you sent me, because Mother Earth totally has got this. And people are listening to these cabal members that have our best interests not at heart in the slightest. And we had this glorious Mother Earth filled with medicines, energies, frequencies, animals, creatures, plants, medicines. And and she's totally got this. And you really brilliantly pull off some of these skits about that. I love the one when your face is painted like the planet. Oh my God. I can't wait to watch this. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about all of that. I just love this.
Well, so in terms of like my inspiration for doing the Earth sketch, part of it was to make fun of some of the gender warfare, and so you guys are going to see me playing with those issues quite a bit. And I'm sure it's something that would offend many people, which is quite all right with me. But the other element of it was, if we're always going on about climate change and, people going on about the pollution of the Earth, like there's obviously some damage to the Earth that we're doing. But to me, I was like, I wonder if it's more relevant to talk about the psychic pollution, and about how like the pollution of human minds is really like the Earth has to encompass that as well. And what does it mean for the Earth on this psychic level, that we are in like total inner chaos, and that we're holding on to all these weird lies and distortions in our bodies, which means the Earth has to hold on to them too. And it's like, just you want to clean the Earth up, clean yourself up, like, clean your mind up. That's part of it as well,
Oh, totally. And actually, I mean, that's one of the biggest points that I try to make in my presentations is what you just said right there. And the Earth does, I feel everything. It has a consciousness. And I love how you expressed that in the clip that you sent. And yeah, people don't realize the pollution of this toxicity, this divide and conquer, the negativity. It's like, wow. I mean, we're microcosms of the living planet. The planet has a consciousness. We have a consciousness. And it's really, really hard on the planet, especially as a mother energy, to deal with all these squabbling kids that are listening to these patriarchal screwballs. And I love that you shed light on that, because I'm like, why aren't people talking about Mother Earth and the power of this planetary consciousness and the fact that it's taking us into ascension? Why are we listening to others? I mean, why?
Hello. I know, looking at the Earth, it's funny because the climate change narrative as it is, that's based on all these really terrible models that like aren't data. They're just really, really warped models that mislead people about the actual state of the Earth on a really huge, huge level. And like, I think one of the things people forget about is that the Earth is not a victim of humanity in that way. This victim consciousness, like projecting it onto the Earth, that like the poor Earth is like drowning in humans. Like you totally disregard the power of this being on so many levels. Like,
and people like Al Gore are speaking on behalf of Mother Earth. It's just like, these men, well, it's not about their gender, but it's like, who are they to speak on behalf of Mother Earth? And this is what I love about your wisdom and sensitivity and intuition, is that you really are speaking truth, and the truth frequency of what I feel this planet is all about, and the power that it holds. And absolutely, she is, it's she, he, whatever, is not a victim. And this victim consciousness, I just can't even believe it. I mean, to me, it's like heavy, thick fog, soot coming. It's like being like in the worst part of Philadelphia or something. It's just, I can't believe the atmosphere that people create, because we are generators and creators and co-creators. People are generating this terrible energy, and bringing the humor back is everything. And the thing is, because when people watch it, it's going to snap a lot of people out of their funk of taking everything way too seriously, being overly offended. And to me, I can't think of a better medicine. And I hope you're just going to continue to do this.
Yep.
It's going to be a theme.
Yes.
And maybe go on tour.
Yes.
And come to our town.
I've thought about it. I would love to. I should probably do some more, like, you know, some stand-up and some sketch comedy live. That's certainly in the books. I have a new series that I'm working on after this. So following the comedy special, I'll be doing another series on Rise TV that'll be like episodes instead of a 60-minute special. That's right now, the working title is Simon Esler's Dystopian Imaginarium. And yeah, so I'm brewing up some stuff for that. Right now, you know, the main focus of the special is to help people adapt better to what's going on. So our community, for example, certainly has a tendency to overconsume like dark information, right? We have a tendency to consume way too much disturbing, traumatic information about like the true state of the world and the secrets that are going on. And we all have a limit. We all have a limit to how much of that we can consume. And so, you know, a big part of my message is you need to know what your limit is on that when you need to go and stop and laugh and be light. Because if you cross that limit for yourself, then adapting to your circumstances becomes very difficult. When you oversaturate yourself with that kind of negativity, you start to embody it on a vibrational level. And we have to be very mindful of being researchers of darkness that don't allow our physicality to start to reflect that internally. And so stopping and laughing and, you know, finding these lighter ways into what's going on is really medicinal, I think, for a community that's so focused on uncovering the truth that sometimes we lose our capacity to adapt in a healthy way to what's going on.
I totally agree. You know, it's important to expose the dark stuff. And I've made a point when I do share the dark stuff, if I don't have something uplifting to end with, if I don't have way more of a positive message to sort of help offset the level of heaviness or darkness, then we're not transforming or creating alchemy. I mean, we are the shift. We are creating the shift. The earth responds to us. I love that you said that, because that's one of the most important things for people to realize. If you want to heal the planet, if you want to clean it up, if you really care about climate change, deal with your own climate. We are earth, air, fire, water, ether.
Yes.
It's up to us to, you know, and that's in upgrading our DNA. I mean, we're elemental beings. Our DNA is elemental. This junk DNA doesn't need to be junk. It's a treasure. But how are we going to access it if we don't take responsibility? We're not at the mercy of what the news tells us, whether it's alternative news, whether it's, you know, just the type of stuff that would be censored. And that's why fake news and mind control has been so successful, because it infects people's creative energy. And then they're enabling an artificial timeline and they don't realize it because they are comfortable being a victim to it. So I'm so glad that you're breaking these programmings, because to me, this is, you're a deprogrammer and an activator. And if I were ever to be imprisoned, I'd hope to share a cell with somebody, any situation like you. So any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up timelines, and, you know, again, this is something that I decided to tackle a little bit. And so one of the concepts I played with is what if the Karens evolved into time travelers who are going back through and trying to politically correct the timeline, and they're finding the most politically incorrect points of the timeline, and they're going through and they're trying to like modify everyone's behavior in their lives, and like, you know, like you said, like blowing it up to absurdity, like all these Karens going after everyone all the time online, shaming people and canceling people and this whole thing. And like, you know, to me, blowing that up into time travel was like it was probably my favorite sketch that I did for the whole thing. I'm really excited for people to see it.
This is going to be so good. And I swear the timing couldn't be better, because the absurdity is so mind blowing that, I mean, we are watching theater, and one can safely assume that we're dealing with a White House movie set, and not even I mean, so everything's theater, using us as prey to siphon and harvest our fears and anxieties. We got to just unite and laugh. And this is what heals relationships, right? The ability to, I mean, can you give us some examples of where maybe in your life, and I know you've already given some, but I could just talk to you forever. So I'm just going to ask a few more questions. Where in your life you really, really, it stood out that you were able to turn a situation around that almost seemed like impossible. And I know that's the kind of question one would need to maybe sit and reflect upon, but is there anything kind of popping out where you're able to completely transform a situation? And well, I know this is what the topic is on a larger picture level as far as what we're dealing with.
Well, I would go back to, I would go back to my
kids.
Yeah, I would go back to my kids. I would definitely go back to my kids and moving through this war, right? And the fact that they're born into a war and being able to help them transmute and to, as a family, transmute this war. Like, it has been endlessly beneficial and medicinal for us as a family to have like family jokes, you know, family jokes that we return to over and over again to process what's going on and to deal with the ridiculousness of it and to not be divisive. For example, you know, the whole vaxxed versus unvaxxed division. This is very, very dangerous. And so one of the benefits of being light about it all is, like, on the one hand, I'll play with my kids about, you know, the aggressiveness of the vaccine propaganda and how they're trying to like vaccinate everyone, you know, constantly. And it's every time we turn on the radio, they're pumping either a vaccine commercial or they're shaming the people who haven't been vaccinated. I mean, it's really, really rampant here. But at the same time, not teaching them to be against people who have chosen to get the vaccine, not teaching them to be judgmental, like still being light about it all and laughing at the absurdity of the authoritarianism. But at the same time, recognize it, like, we have friends and family that, you know, through their own circumstances, they have chosen to get the jab. And it is what it is. Our relationships don't need to fall apart. In fact, that is part of what they want, you know. That's the desire, is to turn us against each other, you know. And so I'll say that bringing humor to contrast the aggressive propaganda, it's helped my kids see how absurd the propaganda it is. Now that they've seen sort of the characters I play and some of the sketch, you know, the characters I'll make up in the moment with them that privately in my family, then when they hear the propaganda, it's very clear to them how over the top it is, how inappropriate it is, you know, how little it has to do with personal freedom. And so, you know, I've been raising my children with full awareness of modern day warfare. And one of the ways to teach them about that is comedy in a lot of ways. You know, we live in a psychological war, a spiritual war, a biological war. We live in that time. My kids were born into a war, and it is what it is. That's fine, you know, but there are healthy ways to have them relate to this so that this concept of them being born into a war isn't full of desperation. It just is full of purpose and clarity and focus. You know, it's just your mission.
That's so brilliant. And it keeps one out of the survival kind of fight or flight chakra. And that's what they want, because then we can't hear our own intuition or higher guidance because we're in just panic mode. And yeah, inserting that humor, gosh, you know, is everything. And definitely I wouldn't be alive if I didn't have that. And I just have to say that you remind me of the movie Life is Beautiful. Do you know which movie that is? It's a father who is in the Second World War, dealing with Nazi stuff. And he completely shields his son from all the trauma through humor, to the point where it just wasn't the devastation that, I'm going to watch it again because of this conversation. It was a really powerful movie, and you remind me of that. And this is a whole other level of war, where to me, the way we de-weaponize any kind of weapon, it doesn't matter if it's the jab, chemtrails, they really need our minds. If we get our minds back, then the weapons are nullified. They don't work. And so we de-weaponize the weapons when we overcome the mind control. And to me, laughter is that switch.
Yes. And, you know, I've had a lot of realizations about this lately, because another piece that I'm working on right now is a docu-series on the war on the family. And so I've been doing deep dives into the psychology of the family and how the family unit causes individual to develop. And so one of the interesting things that I found is something called internal family systems therapy by a psychologist named Richard Schwartz. And it really deeply connects actually to 𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗏 O'Brien's testimony, because he talks about how internally we are already made up of multiple personalities. We have parts. We are a multiplicity of these different personalities already. And that basically the family is what forms that. And so he looks at it in a fractal way, where basically the family circumstances you have growing up, they internally reflect into the different parts that you have. And we all already know this. So a lot of us will say this, speak this way. We'll be like, oh, part of me really wants to, but part of me really doesn't. We already talk about ourselves like that because we have internal contradictions. And just when you look at it logically, if you're feeling internally contradicted, it means you have multiple parts of yourself that are not agreeing. So this idea that we are made up of parts, like, it's become a source of great humor for me, because now I can internally reflect and recognize that sometimes it's just like two siblings. It's like a fight between me and my brother reflected internally in parts of myself, or like the way my parents would, you know, deal with arguments, or the way me and my sister would deal with each other, or the way my brother and sister would deal with each other. And you realize you have these internal reflections. And so once you realize that you have like an internal family system of beings, you have a little family of personalities living in you, and you can become curious and light about it. Sometimes it's like a little comedy show where you're just like, oh, these two parts of me are being so ridiculous, and you have to be the parent. And it gets into like reparenting and like the theories around reparenting oneself. And to me, that's a big source of lightness and being able to laugh at oneself. So coming into those theories and recognizing, you know, how it's connected to 𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗏 O'Brien's story about her personality being traumatized, and then, you know, it creating compartmentalized personalities that can then be robotically programmed. It made so much sense to me that we are naturally sort of fractalized internally in this way, and that the cabal figured that out way before us. And so they knew that that was the case, and they figured out how to make these personalities so separate from each other that they can then be programmed and used for specific purposes. And so I believe these discoveries are really, really important. And frankly, it's increased my ability to laugh at myself and take my internal contradictions less seriously.
Oh, right. Totally. Oh my gosh. I'm interviewing somebody next week, actually, who I've interviewed before, named Derek. And he has a similar story to 𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗏 O'Brien. He has about 200 personalities, and some of his alters are there to heal the other alters. Or, I mean, it was so fascinating because I just finally finished the documents he sent me. So I'm just kind of reflecting on that and just said, and it's just so interesting the way that he's kind of related them. And it's also funny
Nice.
With what you just said. I've said to clients before, sort of metaphorically, that some of these aspects are like a child in the back seat of the car screaming. Okay, sometimes they're just screaming for no reason. Sometimes they want a sippy cup, want a toy to play with, or they crap their pants. But they're not going to take the driver's seat. They don't have a driver's license. You would never give them authority over your life or ability to run your life, but they need unconditional love, and they need to at least be heard. And those cries need to be understood well enough to know how to contend with them. But they're not going to take over and grab the steering wheel. So it's kind of like those aspects of ourself that don't have ultimate authority or dominion over our higher self. Is that kind of what you're talking about or saying?
Absolutely. Yes, totally. Because like in Richard Schwartz's work, he came from a classical psychological background, but he ended up in a very spiritual place with all of this, because as he worked with people more and more, he does this exercise in his sessions where he gets sort of direct contact with specific parts in people, and he just asks them to step aside and step aside and step aside until like what he calls the capital S self comes through. And this is what he's found, that there is a capital S self, there is a higher self, there's this compassionate, patient being at the core of everyone who can then address the parts with wisdom and clarity and patience, and that every single person has this. And what blew his mind was that from classical psychological theory, he had been told that if someone doesn't have a proper upbringing, if they don't have the right parents and the stable enough family, they'll never have that stable self. They will always be dealing with the psychological mess of the family. And what he found was that even the most damaged people he worked with, this guy went into prisons and worked with pedophiles and murderers. Like, he got into the most damaged people, and he found even those people have that higher self that can come through when you just gently ask the parts to just wait, step aside, so that you can speak to them one by one and give them space and compassion. And without fail, it would come through every time. And Kathy O'Brien talks about this as well, that if you look at yourself sort of like a pie chart, that the traumas can make it so that your pie chart is increasingly fractionalized, right? But the center of the pie is you, is that core self. And so this is where there's like these connections between their theories. And like, you know, in addition to creating sort of more fractures or more alters, one of the other things he found in working with these people in prison for crimes like pedophilia and like serial killers and all this, that they would fractionalize into deeper levels. So their parts would have parts, and their parts would have parts. And he would have to parse out the fractal layers of their personalities that had split up deeper and deeper, and like help bring that capital S self. And so again, like, this is like a big part of what humor is doing, because it brings curiosity and lightness, and it gets you back to a place where you can take a hold of who you are more firmly and not have little rogue parts, like you said, like taking the driver's seat, like a toddler's behind the wheel. Like, I think this is, you know, a lot of the time when people are, their little toddler selves, you know, cause them to throw like big tantrums. A lot of like the people getting like triggered and offended, a lot of those people, that's like a little kid who never stopped after this one trauma, being 6, and that kid is given full reign in their adult life.
Right.
You know, this is what you see with a lot of people throwing tantrums, like being offended and all this. To me, that's a big part of what that is. And these people need to laugh at themselves very badly.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, you know, getting into that sort of divine innocence, even at 0 point field, it feels, I mean, it is connected. I mean, creates spiritual maturity. So it almost helps a person grow up to get back to the divine innocence of a child without it being the child that's already been hurt or criticized or overly scolded to the point where it throws tantrums due to a reaction to its environment. Even though, I mean, I know it's a developmental phase too, and even if the parents are really good, we're going to deal with screaming children. But the spiritual maturity that can reclaim divine innocence without that sort of immature child running the show, that's rewarded or encouraged in our society. Because without spiritual maturity, we're not going to evolve. And I just have to say one thing, when you were talking about the pieces of the pie and the fragments, when I do astro charts, which I really don't do much anymore, I always see it as all these pieces of the pie, there's 12 and a 13th line. It all comes down to what's in the center, that all these patternings that we live through, negative or positive, depending on how we perceive, because really we determine if something's positive or negative, that it ultimately brings us into the center. So talk to me a little bit about, we experience things in life, right? And we might judge these experiences. Oh, that's a misfortune. Oh, I'm a failure. Oh, because of this, and I messed up. It's a huge mistake, you know, and all these self-judgments. So we're talking about the cultural ones, but on a personal level, the self-sabotage that comes with the human experience. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how humor serves that? And I know we've touched upon it, but.
Well, I mean, I've personally had just some breakthroughs in this area because, you know, I have a very active intellect, and it can be a strength for me, certainly, but it can also be a weakness when it comes to some of this self-reflective work, because the speed at which my intellect moves can cause self-sabotage to happen very quickly in very subtle ways. And uncovering this has been some very interesting work for me, because I found that my issues often wouldn't be that part of me that was being that was throwing the tantrum, or that part of me that was like really feeling frustrated about, you know, my life circumstances. It was like sort of the part of me that was judging those parts of me. The part of me that was like constantly analyzing the parts of me, this sort of like intellectual overlord part that was like, you know, always there, not allowing those parts to be who and what they are and express what they are, you know? And so I think a lot of us have parts of ourselves that have become so normalized that we don't see them when they're functioning. We think it's our capital S self, and it's not. It's one of our parts actually, you know, lording over the situation. And, you know, I'll bring it back to some of the theories of Richard Schwartz, because that's really the realm I've been playing in a lot with my research and just with my self-work. And he sort of talks about how parts can become either protectors or exiles. And so based on a trauma or a life experience, a part might become an exile, where all the other parts in your internal family system, they reject that part. So it's your black sheep in you, right? And then you can also have protectors who are like overly protective and don't allow, you know, certain forms of communication to go on. And so, you know,
right? Like, because it triggers, like getting triggered.
Yeah, if you get, yeah. So when you get triggered, the trigger could be, it could be impacting an exile, it could be impacting a protector within you, or it could be like a battle between two. Like, it can be very complicated because it's a family, right? This idea that it's a family, that it's like a fractal of your own family upbringing reflected inwards, and what you personally did with that according to your design, you know, being who you were in your family. And, you know, all of this has really helped me to understand that what I need to take a closer look at is just the conversation, the interactions that are happening between these parts. And then one of the sort of highest levels of response that I've found is sort of Taoist teachings of not doing, of stopping doing, of going into more of a not doing, more of a being state. And in Taoism, they talk a lot about training your eyes and your ears to look inwardly with grace and kindness and with gentleness and stillness. And so this is one of the things that I found is when I notice that I hit an area of my life where I'm really triggered and I have parts of me that are like in deep turmoil, that sort of Taoist way of looking with my eyes and listening with my ears with very, very subtle, gentle application of those senses inwards. And that becomes healing for the parts. And so it's like the way that they get acknowledged and listened to is within this space of just not doing, of silence, of quietude and stillness. And so it's like when I look at the parts within me that are in turmoil with eyes that have that vibration of stillness and kindness, and when I listen and I actually feel the quality of my internal listening shift, I notice those parts begin to settle into their naturally valuable states. Because really, it's not like there's parts that need to be like blasted out of you, that need to be gone. They all have naturally valuable states and have a naturally valuable purpose for you as a being. And sometimes it's really just not doing. Like, it's so much like parenting, because one of the best philosophies I found in parenting is really about watching the extent to which you're interfering, right? And removing your interference. Like, one of the biggest problems today with child rearing is adult interference. Okay, children need to be allowed to be children without adult interference. And this is the same with the work with the self, that sometimes the issue in you, the turmoil, is because you just won't stop interfering in your own internal space. And what happens when you sit and just stop your own interference and stop doing in that internal way? And I've found that this creates a space that allows those parts to reveal to me what their purpose is and what they've needed to say for so long, and why they felt stuck at the age of 6 or at the age of 3 or at the age of 10 or whatever it is, so they can tell their story so that we can just move on and get to work together.
Oh, so brilliant. And I gosh, I've had those realizations along the way. I have to remind myself though, and catch myself when I start to do some of the things that you mentioned. But yeah, it's like just really holding space, and it's that unconditional love. And when people talk about self-love, it's not like, oh, I love myself like in an ego way. It's self-love because these parts that are traumatized, or one just is maybe trying to hide or be in denial about because, oh, you know, whatever. No, it's unconditional love, and it's bringing humor and levity to the situation in order to break down the barriers that create the fragments and the compartmentalization that are obviously super extreme in people like Cathy O'Brien's case. And I just feel that melts down the barriers between personalities is that level of acceptance, unconditional love, and the capacity to listen. And I think there's so much new age BS about, oh, don't feel that, or that's bad, or think like that, or you shouldn't do that. It's like, that's just as bad as old paradigm nonsense that we're trying to get out of. It's just disguised in certain lingo with, you know, maybe crystals in your hand. Crystals that obviously don't really work if they're stuck in a new age. But do you know what I mean? What are your thoughts, you know,
Yep.
the new age deceptions of how we should be processing things, and some of the controls that, you know, come from so-called positive movements that actually sabotage and hijack our capacity to be real with each other? Like, you know, I'm not afraid of people seeing through me. I never claimed to be a spiritual leader or enlightened. I might've had past lives where I was that. But yeah, I could ramble on here, but you know what I mean? Like some of the deceptions where
the new age movement
tells you how to process stuff. What are your thoughts?
It's weird. It's weird. I will say that, you know, it did not, there's a lot of ways that the new age movement misled me personally. And I am very, very confident and clear in the extent to which the new age movement was infiltrated by people who were desirous of watering down good information, of leading people away from the truth. So there were genuine, to me, there were genuine agents, and there genuinely are agents whose task it was to muddy the waters in that way. But at the same time, we do just have an issue with immature humans who struggle to take personal responsibility, who struggle to move towards maturity. And, you know, I think that spiritual bypassing is a huge, huge issue. And some of that comes from this tendency to disregard who we are inside of ourselves, right? Like, you know, you may have a part of yourself that is very cruel and impatient because that's what it needed to be to survive. Who knows, right? We might have parts of ourselves that are corrupt in a way that we're very judgmental in the world, right? You could have like a little supervillain living with you, and you have to find a way to greet that being with respect. And I think there's been a lot of spiritual bypassing in the new age movement that has really misled people. And, you know, I'll bring it to sort of the counter argument to this idea that we naturally have parts is the monomind, is the idea that we're beings with just this one mind. And, you know, we're much more sophisticated than that. Like, yes, we have that core self, but we also are fractal in nature within ourselves. And we need to be able to recognize that it's not a monomind. And I found that to be very misleading. And so when you get into things like the law of attraction, for example, this is one of the things that I think the new age movement, you know, really sold in a BS way. I think a lot of people were misled in terms of how that functions. I think it was given a very satanic spin, the sort of do what thou wilt, like that your desires are prime, that we are just animals, we are desirous creatures, we're no different than the animal kingdom, and we are meant to follow our desires. And I think that got twisted in a really difficult way. And so, for example, when you look at the concept of someone being unaware of the fact that they can have contradictory parts. So you may have a part of you that's love and light, but you may have a part of you that's judgmental and impatient. And are you able to really recognize that you have these two different parts in you? You know, are you able to do that? And this monomind view doesn't allow people to do that. So when you look at something like the law of attraction, well, yeah, part of you may be seeking to attract something, but while you're focusing on that, are you acknowledging the parts of yourself that are screaming out saying, I don't want that? That's not the way I want to move forward. That's not right for me. What are you doing? You're reliving something that traumatized me. I don't know, right? But the point is that, like, some of these laws and these principles that have been passed along through the new age movement have misled people in these really damaging ways, so that they you know, gather the spiritual knowledge, but they don't embody it. And the way that we see this is that they fail to adapt to negative life circumstances without allowing those circumstances to corrupt who they are. And I think that's like one of the clearest ways, you know?
Absolutely. Really, really well put. And one of the frustrating things, which just to add to what you just shared, is that it doesn't really empower sovereignty. It really is looking to define things instead of encouraging a person to define it on their own terms in a way that's actually healing. I don't find anything healing about instruction or this is how one should interpret things. I think bringing a greater intimacy and holding space for a greater intimacy to get to know oneself better is the most important thing. And like that whole thing of, oh, well, you agreed to this or you attracted it because you made some sort of, yeah, sure. In many cases, sure. But if you project that or put that upon every person's situation, you're not honoring their ability to kind of figure it out for themselves. I do feel there are victims, but victim consciousness isn't the end goal. The victims eventually are going to be spirit warriors and very empowered, but they have to come to terms with it in their own, kind of way, I feel. And it's a process, like healing a wound. The body knows how to do it. You don't need to command it. It just naturally does it. But the mind control and the social engineering aspect brings, to me, energy blocks that create infection, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And there was one more thing I wanted to say also, but go ahead to what you shared about the.
Oh, well, it just.
Go ahead. You go first.
It just made me think of one of the other things that's always been very helpful for me is just the concept of somatic theory and somatic therapy and the way in which trauma actually, gets a home in our body, a specific location in the body, and that this is how we are as beings. And this is one of the other things that Richard Schwartz found in his sessions with people, is that he would find that people's parts had a specific feeling in a specific spot in their body. And, this is the way that we are. So being able to work with the physicality, and it's like you're saying, like something gets caught in our energetic field. And when it begins to live there long enough, then it begins to live in our body physically. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of these places where we're locked up are literally neglected personalities within our fractal structure as we are as sort of beings in our psyche. So it just made me think of that, of how important it is to recognize that the acknowledgement of these different elements of yourself also becomes the acknowledgement of your full body moving into wholeness.
Totally. And just to maybe clarify what I was trying to, say in relation to what you're talking about. I mean, yes, to a certain extent, we agree to everything that we experience, but there's a certain wildness that we see in nature. So when you're talking about all these different parts and, how things get trapped and negating aspects of ourself, I mean, how are we going to overcome geoengineering if we don't overcome the mind control that is actually perpetuating the elementals within us being blocked? I mean, there's places on the planet that are arid naturally all year round, or almost. There's areas that have monsoon seasons. So if we find ourselves crying for 3 months straight or unable to get out of bed, that's not a cause for judgment. Maybe it's seasonal. Maybe it's necessary. If we had a culture that would more embrace the processing that we need to do on an organic level, instead of saying, take this pharmaceutical, you're depressed, or why aren't you getting out of bed? What's wrong with you? And actually saying, okay, this is this time of your life that you need to do this. Don't you think we accelerate the healing process? Because I think a huge barrier to us healing is the judgments we put upon the way our bodies or consciousness want us to heal. I'm glad that I was bedridden in misery and I cried nonstop, because it got me in touch with my mission. Because I asked it, why are you here and what do you want? Obviously, you want to get my attention. Why would I want to cover that up and mask it or put a Band-Aid on it or project on myself something's wrong with me? Maybe something's right with me. And maybe it's a good thing that I'm sensitive, and this is the thing about New World Order and how New World Disorder, how that kind of goes into the New Age stuff, that sameness, this is how we all need to think and process. Nature doesn't function that way. We have a web of life. We have ecosystems. Diversity is the gift of what creates the oxygen and carbon dioxide, everything that helps us to live and breathe. It's diversity. So
yes.
diversity and harmony is a must, even though, you know, there's the predatory aspect. But, oh, I could keep rambling. People would be like, she just smoked pot.
Well, you know, it makes me really think of like the concept of diversity of life path, you know, that we fail to recognize how divergent another person's life path could possibly be from ours, you know. And this is when like a lot of the, like our community, you know, certainly is targeted, and there's many attempts to split the community up and to make sure that a certain amount of unity doesn't ever settle, that it doesn't ever sort of mount into a larger movement. There's definitely overt attempts to make sure that doesn't happen. And, you know, they've been successful time after time. And part of that has to do with the refusal or the lack of maturity to understand how divergent someone's life path has to be to our own, needs to be to our own. And the extent to which someone that we may see as, you know, the enemy, like a plant or someone who's like a disinformation agent, maybe, but even a disinformation agent has a soul path. Even that person has something that they're here to transmute or that they're here to reveal to others. Like I had this experience the other day. I'm so deeply shadow banned on Instagram. Like it's really hard for me to reach people right now. The censorship is really rough. But what I had was an old friend reach out to me who's like on the left-wing side of things, who's not really hip to what's going on. And she reached out because on a whim, she realized she hadn't seen my stuff and decided to look me up and realized that I was so shadow banned, she couldn't even search me on Instagram. Now, she had never even conceptualized that social media would ever do anything as sneaky as hide someone's profile so that you have to type their full name and go to the very bottom of a list to finally find them. This is someone who's known me for like 10 years. Like, you know, they know me pretty well. And so she, after seeing my shadow ban in front of her face, messaged me and was like, I think you're being what they call shadow banned. She's like, I've never seen this. I didn't know this is going on. So you think about it, like, you know, this person's life path was to be on the left wing side of things. You know, this is someone who's more committed to like some of the gender issues that are being lifted up in the narrative and all that stuff. Still a really good person, but this is where they are. And for them, this is how it needed to happen. And for her to have that red pill, I had to be shadow banned. Right? You think about it. I had to be oppressed in that way for her to have that moment of awakening. So we just don't understand the ways that life paths need to intersect and collide. We don't have the maturity of it. And I think that lack of understanding is a big reason why a lot of these operations successfully divide our community over and over again, because we lack that sophisticated understanding of the extent to which someone else's life path might need to be a total mystery to us. We might have just no ability to conceptualize what they're transmuting at all.
Wow. I mean, this really goes back to what you were sharing about just doing the inner work and all these different aspects that might be contradictory. Our friendships or our relationships with our families might have very contradicting belief systems, but the common thread that we can all empower is love, compassion, understanding, and acceptance, and dropping a right or wrong way. Because to me, that's what is going to de-weaponize everything. And, you know, AI has been around for a long time. I feel like we can actually change the whole frequency of AI through overcoming the mind control aspect of it. Because if it was enough to just use the weaponry, they wouldn't bother with the propaganda and the narratives and all these different tactics, because they know that the love frequency is going to take down those weapons. So they need the Hollywood, they need the indoctrination in school systems and colleges and universities. That to me is the bigger weapon than the actual weapons. I mean, there's weapons all around us. I mean, this is a weapon. I could smash somebody over the head with it, but it's also, you know what I mean? It's like the way that perception can change things. And so humor, to me, is the greatest tool, the greatest antidote of these times. And you're bringing in this gift for all of us, this incredible medicine. So is there anything that I didn't ask or anything coming to mind for you that you want to share before you tell us where to find this and how to get it? And of course, I'll put it all in the description as soon as the live is over. But anything, you know, coming to mind?
There is a message that I do want. Yeah, definitely. So I'm wearing this shirt, Theorize About Conspiracies. My comedy special is called Theorize About Conspiracies. And there's a big reason for this, because I really feel like the freedom to theorize about people who conspire is deeply related to free thought on Earth. Okay, and I don't mean being right, because often I'll bring this up and people will be like, yeah, but more like more like a conspiracy realist. And like, yeah, that's true. I get it. We have been right a lot, and it's been a great time to be right. But if we're going to take it back to like freedom of thought, which is the ability to think without dogma, authority, or tradition, then we need to be free to theorize about the way in which others conspire, and even be free to have bad theories, to have terrible theories, and to let the process of human intelligence work it out. And so I really, I am strongly against the term conspiracy theory as an insult of any kind. And for someone to be a conspiracy theorist, when you look at the logical definitions of those terms, we genuinely need people who are theorizing about the way others are conspiring on the planet. And so I really want to point out the absurdity that even our community still like defends themselves. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not, but think about this term. It's not even an insult.
I know.
Okay? It's necessary. It's necessary. It's deeply related to the freedom of thought on Earth. So this is why I ended up naming the special this and focusing on this, because I want people to represent. Be a conspiracy theorist. It's fine. It's good. Do it.
No. Yes. I love talking to you so much. It's so freaking refreshing, because, you know, when I do presentations, it's just like, oh, well, you know, some people are, even an interview, if I don't have proof, I'm like, you know, some of this are theories.
Yes.
I mean, I learned that was a healthy thing, that you look at information, you form a theory. Some might call it an opinion, but it's like, all right, trying to connect dots here. And this is what I'm kind of coming up with. Calling it a theory doesn't mean you're demanding its truth. It means it's up for conversation and speculation. It means it's open.
That's right.
Because it's a theory. And to me, I think it's a great word. And it's just like, oh,
yes,
I'm the crazy conspiracy theorist. It's like, that's a good thing, though. And it's so weird how they can change frequency and vibration. But I'm glad, you know, you're reviving it, and it deserves it. Because I don't want to use the word theory, because I'm not claiming certain things. I can maybe claim as truth, but if it's aligned with one's own personal truth frequency. But fact is a little bit different than a truth frequency. Theory is safe because it gives room to move and adjust accordingly if necessary.
Well, and the way human consciousness evolves, like, it requires bad theories, right? It requires the box theories, right? Because sometimes someone has a bad theory, but it had something that was outside of common thinking that led people to a thread of developing the better version of that theory. And sometimes that's the way it happens. Someone has a really ridiculous theory that seems absurd, and then later on finds out, like, well, their theory wasn't right, but actually they did have this golden thread of truth that we did need to keep, and we've disregarded the rest. So if they hadn't been allowed to have that bad theory, that terrible theory, then we wouldn't even be here. So, you know, within our community, I think there needs to be an understanding. There needs to be an understanding of the difference between cancel culture and calling out bullshit. So, like, yeah, we need to call out people who are spreading bad information, let's say. That certainly there is that problem, because we know the community does have an issue with genuine infiltration. But at the same time, you go around trying to cancel people for having bad theories, you're just the woke left inside of alternative communities. And really, that it can't be like that. It's not that we should always be right, right? We need to be able to have out of the box, like, wacko, crazy theories, because we live in a very constricted matrix of thinking, as indicated by the fact that through repetition, they were able to make most of us believe that being a conspiracy theorist is even a bad thing at all. And that even those of us in the community still believe that we still hold that vibration. People still, they get butthurt being called a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
You know, people get upset. Well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and they get defensive. Don't get defensive. It's not a real insult, because the part of it that feels like an insult is mind control.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's its own form of, you know, if anybody wants to like term anything racist, it's how we perceive and define terminology. It's not about color. It's not about anything. It's what have we allowed our perception to project on the environment around us, and why are we taking everything so personally anyway to begin with? Isn't that something that awakening is all about? Because there's that sort of woke-tardness. I don't mean to use that word.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, oh, the more offended I am, the more of an advocate or activist I am. No, it's like, let's advocate for divine innocence, the organic nature of this planetary consciousness to guide us. Let's trust that a bit more and trust ourselves and learn to laugh. That's everything that they don't want. And so this cancel culture, like, they're not canceling those that are obviously, you know, like this Astro World stuff. People are calling out cancel. There's no censorship.
No, they're not canceling. They're not canceling people. No, it's totally incoherent. You know, like, one of the reasons I made, well, and the other thing I want to, before I forget, is that in science, the definition of a good theory is one that becomes true in the world repeatedly. Okay, that's a good theory in science.
That's the opposite of the definition of insanity, what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. We should be theorizing. And now we are in an era, actually, where a lot of conspiracy theories are proving to be true. So it turns out we had, from a scientific perspective, excellent theories that are being proven in the world. So we do fit that very, very well. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that, you know, I'd always seen the term Karens flying around, and I thought it was funny, but I really didn't relate to it much. And then I had an experience where I went to a coffee shop here in Toronto to go get a coffee during the lockdowns, and I do not wear a mask. I don't participate in that personally. And so I had this coffee shop owner freak out on me and like scream and tell me to go call the police. And like, it was this huge blow up. Went live after it and talked about it. And a whole bunch of Karens, actual Karens, descended on my account, started yelling at me about my white privilege, saying the reason I'm upset is because of my white privilege. And I went and checked all their profiles. It was literally all middle-aged white women. Okay. They all actually fit the stereotype down to the point that it like totally blew my mind. And I was like, Karens are so much more real than I realized.
Wow.
So it's like, you know, to me, I was like, great. So I'm gonna go all out and talk about this because it's a real phenomenon. There's something to do with that specific demographic of women in the world who, I don't know, for some reason they're susceptible to it. And I don't know, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, and it needs to be made fun of because we need to talk about the truth. And like, people need the truth. They need the truth even when it's dark and slightly upsetting. You know, I made this meme that went viral on Twitter the other day. And it's the Sesame Street characters talking about like myocarditis and Bell's palsy. And it's like basically like a Sesame Street promo talking about the vaccine injuries.
You created this clip?
Yeah. Go on my Twitter. Everyone go on my Yes. I did the voices. I did the voices of the Sesame Street characters. You'll like it.
I got to check it out. So what is it?
So it's Big Bird and Cookie Monster talking. I should probably do a 𝗠𝘂𝗶𝗆𝗆 one. So right now I've done Big Bird and Cookie Monster and Elmo. And because I found this guy who's making the memes, like the Sesame Street memes of the letters. And I was like, I can do all these voices. So I'm going to do the Sesame Street PSAs where M is for myocarditis and B is for Bell's palsy. And what's the Elmo one? Oh, G is for gaslighting. You guys can go look at my Twitter. You guys can see them. But the point is that the one that I do with the myocarditis and the Bell's palsy, I mean, it's kind of dark because it's like talking about people who really got myocarditis and really got Bell's palsy. Like, those people, like, it rides that line because like those people genuinely did get sick, but also it's funny because Sesame Street is pushing vax propaganda in a ridiculous way. So it's like, okay, if they're going to do that, then I'm going to use what they're doing to frame the people who are genuinely vaccine injured. Let's talk about it then.
You're breaking spells. That's why you're a deprogrammer. And as much as it's not funny per se, it has to create that correction to this reversal and inversion and propaganda. So it has its place for sure.
Yes.
Some people,
Yes.
might not resonate with it, but at the same time, if truth bombs or red pills are going to come in a very serious form, isn't it better delivered through a humorous form? And there's going to be a point where the solutions, though, and the antidotes are coming in. And I think regardless of the AI and all the damage that these things are doing, the laughter and the unity that your intention is helping to create is going to offset the damage of any assault or weaponry if people can just embrace it. It's like we have to laugh at ourselves. I mean, I laugh at some of the things I put in my body.
Yeah,
we have to talk about that. I only did coke once. Yeah, but it's like, okay,
yeah.
Here I am. And
Yes.
Let's laugh. We all make mistakes. And,
yes.
and I think there's the reason that maybe it's going to be hard for certain individuals to heal is because of the pride. They don't want to admit that they made a wrong choice, which really creates an energetic block. But you're talking about like the different types of personalities. Then there's going to be that part of their personality that says, no, seek out truth and understand, maybe what one needs to do. That's the importance of, to me, that's the ultimate awakening, is listening to all aspects of self. But I do, and I have to ask you, do you feel once a person is willing to embrace the greater truth and admit, okay, maybe I made a mistake, isn't that the first stage of healing in anything that we do that's probably not good for us? Is being able to admit it. And what I see is this ego block that's saying they're so insecure about the decision that they're into judging others. I mean, who would possibly want to judge somebody else's decisions unless they were totally insecure about the decision they made? I mean, I feel solid in the decisions I'm making. I'm not judging anybody else for theirs. I don't, I've got my other insecurities though. I got a long list of those, but do you know what I mean? It's like, I feel
yes, absolutely. So this is a big part of
that they can't heal because they need to be right and they need to drag everybody down to the decision they made instead of coming to terms with maybe it wasn't the best thing to do. So sorry, go ahead.
I see that happening a lot. I see that happening a lot on the left and on especially with men right now. There's a lot of men that I think are not willing to admit, wait, maybe I got this wrong. Maybe I should have stood up for my kids. Maybe I shouldn't have submitted to all of this. Maybe I was too obedient, too compliant, because now they're coming after my kids. And so I think there's a lot of men that are stuck. They have that pridefulness. They don't want to be like, okay, you know what? I'm on the wrong side of history. I need to step up. I need to admit I was wrong. I shouldn't have been so compliant. I think there's a big block there. And the other thing I wanted to say was that, for me, this has been another inspiration for me to move, to sort of merge worlds, because I was doing comedy theater here in Toronto locally, but at the same time, I was like making Edge of Wonder content and doing conferences and all this stuff. And it was like, they weren't together for me. So there was kind of like a separation between my comedy and my character work and like what I was doing with sort of disclosure work and exposure. And I just sort of realized, like, if I'm constantly positioning myself as an expert in all this spiritual knowledge that is based in humor and lightness. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. So if I'm not based in sharing that part of myself, then I'm kind of compartmentalizing myself every time I step forward to share this kind of material. And so I needed to step back because I felt like, you know what, I'm teaching about all this stuff, but like, I'm not really able to live it at this point to the extent that I'm teaching it. And so I really felt the need to just step back and reconnect with myself. And then emerging from reconnecting with myself, it was like, no, now I realize that my service to this community is not right now rabbit holes of truths and exposing satanic elements and like the subtle nature of consciousness. No, like I need to cut through it with comedy right now because that's more true to who I am and to what I see and feel my community needing. And so a big part of that was me having to realize I was not totally on the right path. It wasn't totally right for me. My adaptation wasn't correct and I needed to reassess and come at this from a different angle. And I'm so much more myself and it's so much better for me to come forward this way right now. So, you know, I had to admit that I was wrong in a lot of what the approach that I was taking to a lot of this.
You're so awesome. That's so great. You know, to me, the leadership role on the planet right now is just being authentic. A lot of people who still have the old paradigm sort of design or model in their head tend to put people on pedestals or tend to label or lump people in categories, right? And I never like that. You know, it's like, oh, because you did this conference or event, you're therefore like the ET UFO conspiracy person. At the same time, I'm not ashamed of those labels, like we were talking about the word conspiracy theory. But what I love about what you're sharing is you're choosing your sovereign self. You're choosing like, what is going to shift your vibration? Because something that you've been doing isn't working anymore. It maybe served you or worked for the time that it did, but now it's time to transform it. And this is such a great example because the fact that you're giving yourself permission and you're embracing it is a really important reminder. And you're not just going to get this kind of wisdom from this interview. You're going to get like a lot of giggles and reminders and huge truth bombs through this comedy show and everything that Simon puts out. And you just keep it raw and real. And you're so honest with yourself. And you're just a stellar person. I'm really grateful for the conversation. I certainly feel better about everything talking to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the space to do it. Because, you know, it took me a while to get to that point where I felt I could step forward in that way. Because I was like, but people don't see me that way. Like I had to get over my weird stuff about how people saw me and be like, wait a minute, what? Who cares? That's not who, you know. And it might be interesting for people, especially people who followed all my work on Edge of Wonder. This is a huge switch from what I've done. So it'll be fun to see people's response to that and people seeing how like what it's like to be a whole person who can be totally different in different scenarios. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so I'm excited. And, you know, I'm excited because this is just, it's so many things for me. Offering this is so many things for me. So I can't wait. And so the special, I guess I'll share the details now. The special drops tomorrow on rise.tv.
Oh, I'm glad we got this in. It drops tomorrow? So it can be viewed
tomorrow.
Basically.
Yes, I'm going to be live on Rise TV with the guys there. I'm going to be doing, I think I'm going to be doing Weirder News with Ben tomorrow. And then we're going to get in and chat about the comedy special, but it drops on Rise TV tomorrow. Also, before it drops, I'm going to be putting a 6-minute super edit on my YouTube and on my Instagram. People can watch. And then along with that, I will be sharing a link for a 3-day free trial. So if you're not a member of Rise TV, you still have no excuse. You got to come watch it and hang out with us because I'm going to hook you up with 3 free days so you can come and hang out and give me your feedback and laugh with us and you know, maybe inspire the comedy that I make moving forward. So, you know, check it out. And honestly, people be a conspiracy theorist. Just own it. It's fine. Do it. And I opened a new shop with some apparel and stuff. You can get this shirt and lots of other cool stuff called my Free Thought Shop. So, you know, please check that out. Follow me on all my socials on Instagram and Telegram and Twitter and YouTube and TikTok, all that stuff. Come play. Let's laugh together.
Oh man, Simon, you're brilliant. And it's not just like humor. You actually activate soul smiles, right? This level of a being is able to actually smile. You're gonna switch on some people, activate them, and deprogram them. And you're such a blessing for humanity. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I can't wait to see this. And it launches tomorrow. And is there constant replays? I mean, it's like a permanent thing that if a person isn't able to tomorrow, it's out there.
Yeah. It's basically like a Netflix level conspiracy comedy special on the Netflix style platform. So it's just there. You guys want to sign up for Rise TV? It'll be there. It's a 60 minutes of sketches and red pills, and you can watch me play a bunch of ridiculous characters.
Oh, love you so much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Simon, I really look forward to this and future conversations and connections. And I feel completely shifted by this conversation.
Thank you. I feel great too. It was awesome. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for having me. And I'll see you on Rise TV.
Yes, absolutely. And future events and whatever else. And that's awesome. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Simon, for your incredible service to humanity.